Teaching is the greatest act of optimism. Colin Wilcox. Hi, I'm Ms. Lolifika Potter Gavasho from Ozamis City. Today, I will be sharing to you about teaching and some important tools to make it effective. Teaching is the systematic presentation of facts, ideas, skills, and techniques to students. Nowadays, that we have modernized world with high technologically invented gadgets, students or learners become diverted from such a traditional to what is currently common to everyone. This makes traditionally oriented teachers challenged. So, to attract learning to students to maintain quality education, teachers and even the whole education system has to integrate the utilization of appropriate instructional materials, objects that serve as instrument in education and containing information which present systematically a programmed sequence of instruction to students and devices like computers, televisions, records, teaching machines, and others. However, this has limitations. Not everyone among teachers and students can afford to have such materials or gadgets. With this consideration, the typical instructional material like books is still very much employed in teaching here in the Philippines. Thus, it is imperative that the contents of textbooks and modules from which students derived their bulk of knowledge must be of high quality and provide satisfactory remedies to the queries of learners. An understanding of the instructional designs could shed light on how to determine the appropriate content and correct approach in a development of a textbook or module. Instructional materials are critical elements in assuring the effectiveness of instructional programs. They aim to provide each student with quality instructional materials with the maximum efficiency and cost effectiveness. To maintain and monitor a system of managing learning resources is of school's responsibility. Let me share to you the responsibilities of the Director of the Curriculum and Instruction or DCI. First, the university will maintain a collection of textbooks and other instructional materials sufficient to support the instructional program in all courses offered by the institution. As much as possible, each student will be provided with basic reference materials in each subject for which the course content and learning skills are appropriate. All orders for adopted instructional materials shall pass through the office of the DCI. All instructional materials from outside vendor must be authorized first by DCI to check whether or not such requested instructional materials conform from university curriculum standard. Third, instructional materials which are of adoption and have no specific use in a certain program will be revised according to curricular genre for possible redistribution. The fourth, a program for management of instructional materials which minimizes loss and damage will be established and maintained. This program will include regularly scheduled book checks and inventories, instructional material records, reports, and inventories which are required by statute, board policy, and administrative directive will be prepared, maintained, and transmitted. The fifth one, for instructional materials such as those in compact discs or in other forms, rigorous efforts will be made to collect the charges to students for its loss or damage. The sixth one, new material shall not be requisitioned as long as appropriate, usable, adopted materials are available for use. The college dean or campus director, through the respective instructional materials development committee, will be responsible for evaluating materials requested by faculty which are not in a university adopted list, like for example supplemental materials or materials from a course unique to the college or campus. Next, let's talk about responsibilities of the Vice President for Academic Affairs, or the VPAA, in the Director for Curriculum and Instruction, or DCI. The first one is university budget for the requisition of references and other instructional materials will be allocated considering both the total funds available and the needs of the individual, college, or campus. Second, comprehensive evaluations of instructional materials being submitted for adoption and listings will be properly coordinated among concerned units of the university. The university listing of instructional materials will be used to identify the approved instructional materials to be used in all academic units unless exceptions are granted by the VPAA for the DCI to authorize the use of IMs from outside sources. A display collection of university-adopted textbooks and other instructional materials will be maintained for examination and evaluation by the students, faculty, administration, and the general public. School instructional materials requisitions will be received, consolidated, and reviewed to ensure compliance with state statutes, university policies, administrative directives, and academic standards. Next, requisition for instructional materials will be prepared and submitted to the printing press and various publishers. Instructional materials will be received, stocked, and delivered to the appropriate college or campus. And lastly, obsolete instructional materials will be received and reissued or discarded. The next thing that I will be sharing to you is about adoption, listing, and selection of materials in a school. Let's start with adoption. The adoption process of instructional materials results in the listing of IMs, which may be purchased under contracts. This assures that the best materials are identified and available on a continuous basis at lowest prices possible. Sufficient quantities of school-adopted material will be maintained to assure prompt deliveries. A form is included to respond to questions or complaints concerning the content of materials included in district adoption. We also have university listing of instructional materials. We have A. University listing of instructional materials is intended to place reasonable and practical limits on the number of different series of the IMs used in individual courses offered. It is a means of assuring the consistency of similar course offerings provided within the university and the economic use of funds provided for the purchase of instructional materials, especially those coming from outside sources. B. A ULIM shall continue the recommended and approved instructional materials to be used to implement the instructional materials program. As much as possible, other instructional materials may not be used in lieu of the materials contained in the ULIM. And lastly, the provisions in this manual are not intended to totally prevent the use of additional and supplemental IMs to strengthen the basic materials appearing on the ULIM. So what are those various instructional materials? We have textbooks, instructional aids, and supplementary materials. How do we select the adopted materials or instructional materials? In the selection of the instructional materials, library books and other reading material used in a state university, the standards used to determine the property of the material shall include a kind of students who normally could be expected to have access to the material, the educational purpose to be served by the material, and the degree to which the material would be supplemented and explained by mature classroom instruction as part of a classroom instructional program, and the consideration of a broad racial, ethnic, ecosystem, and cultural diversity of the Filipinos. No books or other material containing prohibited themes as provided under pertinent laws of the land shall be used in the university. And instructional personnel who select and evaluate library materials and other supplementary resources should use the following procedures in their selection. The first is utilize the following resources when feasible. Second, solicit recommendations. Third, consider the viewpoint of the student. The fourth, consider suggestions of parents, lay citizens, and other stakeholders. Books are packed with knowledge. They give you life lessons. They teach you about hardships, love, fear, and every little thing that's part of life. Books have been here for centuries and contain the knowledge of our past, civilizations, and cultures. That's why they still have to be given importance despite having a modernized world. Nothing can replace books. That's all. Thank you so much for listening. Once again, I am Lolifika Potter Gervasio.